The message came without warning on a cold Tuesday morning in December. Every screen on Earth flickered at the same moment, and every radio crackled with static before falling silent, and every phone buzzed with an incoming signal that no one had sent. Secretary General Amara Okonkwo was drinking her morning coffee in the United Nations building when her tablet lit up with an image she would never forget. A creature stood in the holographic projection, towering at least 12 feet tall, with a body made of living crystal that caught and bent light in impossible ways. Behind the creature stretched a massive chamber filled with hundreds of different alien beings, each one stranger than the last, and all of them watching Earth with cold and ancient eyes. "I am Ambassador Velthrax of the Galactic Council," the crystal being announced in a voice that rang like breaking glass. "And I speak now to the species known as human." Amara set down her coffee with trembling hands as staff members rushed into her office with panic on their faces. "You have been observed," Velthrax continued, "for 300 of your years. And in that time we have studied your wars and your weapons and your endless capacity for destruction." The hologram shifted to show images that made Amara's blood run cold. Nuclear explosions blooming over cities and soldiers marching through burning streets, and missiles rising from silos pointed at enemies who had missiles of their own. "You created weapons capable of ending your own species," Velthrax said. "And you pointed them at each other, and you lived for decades with your fingers on the trigger. That was the Cold War," Amara heard herself say, though she did not know if the transmission could carry her voice. "And it ended. It ended because you found new ways to threaten each other," Velthrax replied. And Amara realized with a chill that the alien could hear her perfectly. "The Council has witnessed species like yours before. Species that burn too bright and too fast. Species that cannot contain their own violence." The crystal ambassador gestured with one long arm, and new images appeared. Strange worlds reduced to ash, and alien cities crumbling under bombardment, and entire civilizations wiped from existence. "These were the others," Velthrax explained. "The species we failed to stop in time. The ones who spread across the galaxy like a plague until they had to be cut out by force. We are not like them," Amara said firmly. "We have changed, and we are still changing." "You have not changed," Velthrax replied without emotion. "You have simply grown more efficient at violence. And our projections show that in 2,000 years, you will be a threat to every peaceful species in the galaxy. And in 5,000 years, you will challenge the Council itself." The chamber behind Velthrax stirred with movement as hundreds of alien representatives nodded or clicked or made sound of agreement. "The Council does not permit threats to grow," the ambassador continued. "And so we have reached a decision that cannot be appealed and cannot be changed." Amara gripped the edge of her desk as the words struck her like physical blows. "You have one of your solar years to prepare," Velthrax announced. "At the end of that time, your star will be collapsed, and your system will be sterilized, and your species will be ended." The room around Amara erupted in chaos as aides shouted into phones and generals demanded answers, and politicians stared at screens with pale faces. "This is not punishment," Velthrax added. "This is prevention. And the Council offers you one mercy." "What mercy could possibly matter now?" Amara demanded. "You may select representatives to preserve your cultural achievements," the crystal being replied. "Your art and your music and your literature will be stored in the Council archives and remembered long after your species is gone. You expect us to thank you for that." "We expect nothing from you," Velthrax said. "We have seen 37 species face this judgment, and all of them spent their final days in grief and acceptance. And we assume you will do the same." The transmission ended with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Amara stood alone in her office, surrounded by the Chaos of a world that had just learned it was going to die. 4 billion people had watched that broadcast, and 4 billion people were now screaming or crying or holding their loved ones as the truth sank in. They had 1 year, and then they would all be gone. The phone on her desk rang, and she answered it. Without thinking, Madam Secretary General. The voice on the other end said, "The Security Council is assembling, and every world leader is demanding to speak with you. Tell them to come here." Amara replied, and her voice surprised her with its steadiness. "Tell all of them to come here. Every president and prime minister and general and scientist. All of them." "Ma'am, every single one," Amara confirmed. "Because we need to have a meeting." She hung up the phone and walked to the window where she could see the city stretching out below her. Millions of people going about their lives under a sky that suddenly seemed very small. The council thought they knew what humanity would do with its final year. They thought humans would weep and mourn and accept their fate like all the others before them. But Velthrax had made a mistake in that transmission. A single error that gave Amara something she had not expected to feel: hope. The ambassador had said that the council feared what humanity might become in 2,000 years. And that meant the council was afraid. And fear meant weakness. And weakness meant opportunity. Amara Okonkwo was not a soldier, and she was not a scientist. And she did not know how to fight an empire that spanned the galaxy. But she knew how to bring people together, and she knew how to turn enemies into allies, and she knew one thing about her species that the council had somehow missed. Humans did not accept fate. They fought it, and waged against it, and clawed their way forward, even when every odd was stacked against them. The council had given them a year to prepare for death. Amara intended to use it to prepare for war. She turned away from the window and began making calls. And across the world, other leaders were doing the same. And something was stirring in the hearts of 8 billion people who had just been told they did not deserve to exist. The council had lit a fire they did not understand, and humanity was about to show them what happened when you cornered a species that had clawed its way up from the mud through ice ages and plagues and wars and disasters that should have ended them 1,000 times over. They had 1 year. It would be enough. 3 weeks after the ultimatum, the most powerful people on Earth gathered in a bunker beneath Geneva. The underground facility had been built during the Cold War to survive nuclear attacks, and now it hosted enemies who had spent decades preparing to destroy each other. General Chun Wei of China sat on one side of the long table with his military advisors behind him and his face carved from stone. General Marcus Stone of the United States sat directly across from him with the same cold expression he had worn during countless war games that simulated conflict between their nations. President Volkov of Russia occupied the head of the table beside the leaders of the European Council and the presidents and prime ministers of India and Brazil and Nigeria. And Japan and 40 other nations filled the curved chamber until there was barely room to breathe. Religious leaders sat next to atheist philosophers, and corporate executives shared space with labor union organizers, and scientists argued with politicians, while soldiers glared at diplomats. They had been fighting for 6 hours, and they had accomplished nothing. "We must negotiate," the French president insisted for the 20th time. "Surely there are terms we can offer. Resources or technology or promises of peaceful behavior. They have already made their terms clear." Secretary General Okonkwo replied from her position at the center of the room. "Extinction is not a starting point for negotiation. Then we hide," the Japanese Prime Minister suggested. "We build bunkers deep underground and stock them with supplies and preserve a remnant of our species." "Hide from what?" General Stone asked with a bitter laugh. They are going to collapse our sun. And when that happens, the surface of Earth will be burned away in hours, and the underground will freeze solid in months. Then we run, the Brazilian president said, leaning forward with desperate hope in his eyes. We have spacecraft now, and we have a year to build more. So we load as many people as we can, and we flee to another star. Dr. Sarah Chun, the head of theoretical physics at NASA, shook her head and activated a holographic map of nearby space. The closest star with a habitable planet is over 4 light years away, she explained. And our fastest ships would take 40,000 years to reach it. And the council would see us leave and follow us. The room fell into heavy silence as each option was considered and discarded. They could not negotiate because the council did not want anything from them except their deaths. They could not hide because there was nowhere the destruction would not reach. They could not run because they were too slow and the galaxy was too vast. General Chun cleared his throat, and every eye in the room turned to him. There is another option, he said slowly. And 1 year ago, I would have died before speaking of it in this company. General Stone raised an eyebrow but said nothing. But 1 year ago, we had the luxury of being enemies, Chun continued. And that luxury has been taken from us. He gestured to one of his aides who activated a classified file that made the Americans gasp and the Russians curse and the Europeans stare in disbelief. The hologram showed a crashed vessel buried in the mountains of western China. A ship that was clearly not made by human hands. Surrounded by decades of research equipment and reverse-engineered technology. We recovered this in 1953. Chun explained, and we have been studying it ever since. But we have never been able to make it work completely. General Stone stood up so fast his chair fell backward. You have won too, Chun said calmly. And it was not a question. Stone hesitated for only a moment before nodding to his own aide, who brought up another classified file, another crashed ship. This one buried in the Nevada desert. Surrounded by hangars and laboratories and equipment that looked remarkably similar to what the Chinese had built. Roswell, Stone admitted, 1947. And we have been working on it ever since. But we hit a wall 20 years ago and never got past it. President Volkov laughed without humor and activated his own file Tunguska, he said. 1908, and everyone thought it was a meteor, but it was not. And we have pieces of technology that we have never understood. One by one, the secrets came out. The British had recovered debris from the North Sea in 1962. The Indians had found a crashed probe in the Himalayas in 1971. The Japanese had been hiding components from a vessel that went down near Okinawa in 1989. 40 nations had been hoarding alien technology for decades, each one convinced they alone held the keys to the future. Each one terrified that their enemies would discover what they had found. Dr. Sarah Chun was typing furiously as the data flowed together on her screen. Oh my God, she whispered. And then louder, oh my God. What is it? Okonkwo demanded. Separately, each nation has pieces that do not work, Chun explained with wonder in her voice. But together the pieces fit, and I think I know why. She reorganized the hologram to show how the different components connected. Someone wanted us to find these, she continued. Someone scattered them across the earth, knowing that we would hide them from each other. And they designed them so that no single nation could make them work alone. A test, General Chun said slowly, or a gift, Chun replied. One that could only be opened when we finally learn to work together. What does it make? Stone asked. Dr. Chun's face was pale as she completed the final calculations. A faster-than-light drive, she answered. And weapons powerful enough to hurt even the council. The room erupted in a chaos of shouting voices and demands for proof and arguments about who would control the technology. Secretary General Okonkwo slammed her hand on the table so hard the sound echoed off the concrete walls. "Enough," she commanded, and her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "We have 11 months left, and we have a choice to make." She looked around the room at enemies who were slowly realizing they could no longer afford to be enemies. "We can spend our final year fighting over scraps and die, as we have always lived, divided and suspicious and alone." She paused and let the silence stretch. "Or we can do something our species has never done before. And we can become one people with one purpose and one chance to survive." General Chun and General Stone looked at each other across the table. They had spent their careers preparing to kill each other, and now they were being asked to trust each other with the survival of their species. Stone extended his hand. Chun took it. "One people." Chun said, "One purpose." Stone agreed the vote was taken, and it was unanimous. Humanity had chosen Defiance. They called it the Unity Project, and it was the largest effort in the history of human civilization. Every factory on Earth stopped making whatever it had been making and started producing components for warships. Every scientist abandoned their research and joined teams working on alien technology they barely understood. Every soldier began training for a war unlike anything humanity had ever faced. Every border on every map became meaningless overnight. In Beijing, a Russian metallurgist named Alexei worked beside an American engineer named James, and neither of them spoke the other's language, but they learned to communicate through mathematics and gestures and shared determination. In Germany, an Indian programmer named Priya collaborated with a Chinese AI specialist named Liu, and together they created targeting systems that could track ships moving faster than light. In Brazil, an African mining supervisor named Kofi directed operations that fed raw materials to European manufacturing plants that supplied Asian shipyards, that built weapons designed by scientists from every nation on Earth. The old hatreds did not disappear, but they became irrelevant. When you are facing extinction, you do not have time to care about the color of someone's skin or the god they pray to or the flag they used to salute. You only care about whether they can help you survive. The ships began rising from construction yards in the Pacific Ocean within 3 months. Massive angular vessels that looked nothing like the sleek council ships humanity had seen in Velthrak's transmission. Human ships were ugly and brutal, and they looked like they had been forged in a furnace of rage rather than designed by careful engineers. They were painted black because there was no time for decoration and no point in beauty. They bristled with weapons because weapons were all that mattered now. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on the observation deck of the first completed carrier and watched as more ships rose from the ocean below. She had been a captain in the Japanese Navy 6 months ago, and now she commanded the combined fleet of humanity. "How many?" she asked her aide Commander Jackson, who stood beside her. 912 combat-ready vessels, Jackson reported, with another 300 in various stages of completion. "The Council will bring 40,000. "Yes, Admiral." Tanaka nodded slowly and did not look away from the ships rising into the sky. "Then we will have to make every ship count for 40 of theirs." The weapons were harder than the ships. The crashed alien vessels had contained technology that humanity's best minds struggled to understand, even working together. There were energy weapons that seemed to fold space itself and fire through dimensions that human mathematics could barely describe. There were projectiles that existed in multiple places at once and could hit a target that had already moved away. There were shields that did not block attacks, but somehow convinced reality that the attacks had never happened. Dr. Sarah Chun worked 20-hour days in a laboratory beneath the Rocky Mountains surrounded by the brightest minds on Earth, and still the technology refused to give up all its secrets. "It is not enough," she said during a video conference with Admiral Tanaka in month 7. "We understand maybe 60% of what these systems can do, and that is not enough to fight an empire. How long to reach 100%? Tanaka asked. Years. Maybe decades. We have 4 months. Chun rubbed her eyes and looked at the alien components spread across her laboratory. Then, we will have to use what we have and hope it is enough. It was not enough, and everyone knew it. 900 ships. Against 40,000 technology understood incompletely. Against technology perfected over millennia. A species that had been spacefaring for less than a century against an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. But humanity had something the Council had never encountered. They had stubbornness that refused to acknowledge impossible odds. They had creativity born from a history of solving problems that should not have been solvable. They had rage. Deep and burning rage at being told they did not deserve to exist. The training was brutal because there was no time for gentle instruction. Pilots learned to fly ships that moved in ways human bodies were not designed to experience, and many of them died in crashes before ever seeing an enemy. Gunners practiced with weapons that sometimes malfunctioned and killed the crews using them. Engineers figured out how to repair systems they barely understood by trial and error that often ended in explosions. Every day brought news of accidents and deaths and setbacks that would have stopped any normal project. Every day humanity pushed forward anyway. In month 9, something remarkable happened. A young engineer from South Africa named Themba figured out how to boost the power output of the shield generators by 300%. A team of mathematicians from Iran cracked the equations needed to aim the dimensional weapons accurately. A group of pilots from Australia developed tactics that let small ships take down targets 10 times their size. The pieces came together faster than anyone had expected because humanity was learning to think as one species. Instead of many nations, Admiral Tanaka reviewed the final fleet. Status in month 11: 907 combat ships crewed by volunteers from every nation on Earth, weapons that worked well enough to kill. Council vessels, shields that could take hits that would have vaporized anything built with purely human technology. It is still not enough to win. Commander Jackson observed. No, Tanaka agreed, but it is enough to fight, and fighting is all we can do. She turned to face the window where Earth hung blue and beautiful against the black of space. 8 billion people down there were counting on her and her fleet to give them a chance. The Council thinks we spent this year preparing to die, she said quietly. Didn't we? Tanaka smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. No, Commander. We spent this year preparing to make them regret ever threatening us. She activated the fleet-wide communication system. All ships. This is Admiral Tanaka. The Council fleet will arrive in 30 days, and when they come, they will expect to find a species ready to accept extinction. She paused and let her words sink in across 900 vessels. They will find something else entirely. They will find humanity. And God help them for that. The fleet roared its approval across every channel. Humanity was ready for war. The Council fleet arrived exactly on schedule because the Council did everything on schedule. 40,000 vessels emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. Each one a masterpiece of engineering that had been refined over thousands of years. They were beautiful ships with flowing lines and gleaming hulls that caught the distant sunlight like jewels scattered across the darkness. They moved in perfect formation because Council species always moved in perfect formation. They expected no resistance because no species had ever resisted. Ambassador Velthrax broadcast her final message from the command ship at the center of the fleet. Humans of Earth, your year has ended and your time has come. Her crystalline form glowed with the light of a dozen stars as she spoke. The Council offers you one final mercy. You may choose representatives to witness your cultural achievements being added to our archives. Your music and your art and your stories will be preserved even as your species is forgotten. She paused as if expecting gratitude for this generous offer. Prepare your world for cleansing. The response came from Admiral Tanaka aboard the carrier Defiance, Ambassador Velthrax. "We have a counteroffer." The Council fleet slowed as thousands of sensor arrays focused on the human ships emerging from behind the gas giants, where they had been hiding. "Turn your fleet around," Tanaka continued. "Leave our system, go back to your council and tell them that Earth is not to be touched." Velthrax made a sound that might have been laughter. "You have 900 vessels against 40,000. Your species has been traveling between stars for less than one of your centuries, while we have ruled this galaxy for 12,000 years. Then you should have plenty of experience with losing. Losing is not something the Council experiences." Tanaka smiled into the camera, and it was the smile of someone who knew something her enemy did not. "There is a first time for everything, Ambassador. And today will be yours." The transmission cut, and the Battle of Seoul began. The Council fleet advanced in the same formation they had used for millennia, because it always worked before. Human ships scattered like startled birds in the Council. Commanders laughed at what they saw as panic and disorder. Then the human ships attacked. They did not form defensive lines like every other species. The Council had conquered. They did not execute precise maneuvers calculated by military computers. They swarmed human pilots, dove their ships directly at Council vessels, and fired weapons at ranges so close that both ships were damaged by the explosions. They rammed burning hulks into enemy formations and detonated their reactors in the middle of Council squadrons. They used tactics that every military AI in the galaxy had calculated as irrational and self-destructive and impossible. They won. The first Council battle group was destroyed in 17 minutes. The commanders of the second battle group watched in disbelief as 300 of their ships vanished in a storm of human fury. By the third hour of fighting, the Council fleet had lost 8,000 vessels and humanity had lost only 200. "This is impossible," Velthrax shouted at her tactical officers. "They are using damaged ships as weapons. They are sacrificing themselves to take single kills. They are not fighting like a rational species." One of her officers replied with terror in his voice. "They are fighting like animals, then destroy them like animals." The Council fleet regrouped and came at humanity with everything they had: energy. Weapons that could crack planets reached out and found human ships that danced between the beams. Missiles that had never missed a target lost track of vessels that changed direction in ways that should have killed their crews. The shields that Council weapons should have overwhelmed held firm because human engineers had figured out how to boost their power, and the human weapons tore through Council defenses like they were made of paper. Admiral Tanaka commanded her fleet from the bridge of the Defiance, and she felt no fear as Council weapons exploded against her shields. "All ships, target their command vessels," she ordered. "Cut off the head and the body will die." 600 human ships converged on the center of the Council formation, where Velthrax watched her empire's military might being torn apart by a species that was supposed to be primitive. "Retreat," she ordered, and the word tasted like poison in her mouth. "All ships retreat." The Council fleet broke and ran. They fled toward the edge of the system, with human ships chasing them and destroying any vessel too slow to escape. The battle had lasted 18 hours. 12,000 Council vessels were destroyed. 23,000 were disabled and drifting. The remainder scattered toward Council space, carrying tailies of monsters that wore human faces. Humanity lost 612 ships and 47,000 sailors. Every name was recorded, and every sacrifice was remembered. Admiral Tanaka broadcast a message to the retreating fleet, and she knew that Velthrax would carry her words back to the Council. "We are humanity," she said. "We do not surrender. We do not submit. We do not die on anyone's schedule but our own." She stood on the bridge of a ship that had taken 100 hits and refused to fall. "Come for us again, and we will come for you. Not to your fleets, but to your homes and your worlds. We will burn everything you have built and salt the ground so nothing grows again." She paused and let her words echo across the void. The Council ruled this galaxy for 12,000 years, and that rule ends today. We are what you feared we would become, and you have no one to blame but yourselves. The transmission ended, and the human fleet began the long work of rescuing survivors and repairing damage and preparing for whatever came next. Behind them, Earth hung in space unmarked. And unharmed, 8 billion people looked up at a sky that had been filled with explosions and saw that the explosions had stopped. The Council had come to end humanity. Humanity had ended the Council's reign. Instead, the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, Ambassador Velthrax returned to Earth. She came alone aboard a small diplomatic vessel that broadcast surrender. Codes no Council ambassador had ever used before, the ship that had once carried the death sentence of an entire species now carried something far more humble, a request for peace. Secretary General Amara Okonkwo met the alien ambassador in the same United Nations Assembly Hall where she had received the original ultimatum. The room was filled with human representatives from every nation and officers. From the fleet that had broken the Council's power, Velthrax seemed smaller somehow, her crystalline form dimmer than it had been in that first transmission a year and a half ago. The Galactic Council is dissolved, the ambassador announced, and her voice carried none of its former certainty. 17 member species have withdrawn from the Alliance. 43 have declared independence, and the remainder have sent me here to negotiate surrender. General Stone asked from his position beside Secretary General Okonkwo to negotiate survival. Velthrax corrected. We wish to discuss membership in whatever new order humanity intends to create. Okonkwo studied the alien who had once pronounced her species' extinction 6 months ago. She would have felt burning rage at the sight of this crystalline creature. Now she felt something closer to exhaustion and a strange kind of pity. You came here to kill us all, she said. Every man and woman and child on this planet. You were going to collapse our sun and watch us burn. Yes, and now you want to be our allies. We want to understand. Velthrax replied. Your ships reached our homeworld 3 weeks ago, and we prepared for death. We assumed you would do to us what we tried to do to you. She paused, and something like confusion flickered across her alien features. Instead, your ships left supplies, food and medicine and aid for the worlds damaged in the battle. And then they left without firing a single weapon. Did you expect something different? We expected revenge. Velthrax admitted. Every species we have studied would have taken revenge. Every species except apparently yours. Admiral Tanaka spoke from her position near the window. We considered it, she said honestly. There were voices in our fleet who wanted to burn your worlds to ash and leave nothing but silence where your civilization used to be. What stopped them? We did, Okonkwo answered. Because that is not who we want to be. She stood and walked toward the alien ambassador until they were standing face to face. You were right about us in some ways. We are violent and dangerous, and we have done terrible things to each other throughout our history. She paused and let the silence stretch. But we have also done remarkable things. We have shown mercy to enemies and rebuilt nations we defeated and turned hatred into partnership. How? Velthrax asked. How can a species capable of such destruction also be capable of such compassion? Because we choose, Okonkwo replied. Every day we wake up and we choose what kind of species we want to be. And sometimes we choose wrong and we hurt each other. But sometimes we choose right and we become something better. She extended her hand toward the alien who had come to kill her world. The Council ruled through fear for 12,000 years, and it gave you peace, but it also gave you stagnation. You stopped growing because you stopped facing challenges. Velthrax stared at the offered hand. What are you proposing? Alliance, Okonkwo said. Not the kind built on threats and punishments, but the kind built on mutual respect and shared purpose. We tried to exterminate you, and we could have exterminated you in return, but we chose not to. Okonkwo replied, That choice is what makes us who we are, and we are offering you the chance to make the same kind of choice. The assembly hall was silent as representatives from 100 nations watched this moment. That would reshape the galaxy. Volthrax reached out slowly and wrapped her crystalline fingers around Okonkwo's hand. What would you have us do? The ambassador asked. Learn, Okonkwo answered. You spent 12,000 years running from conflict, and you forgot that struggle is how species grow. You forgot that facing challenges is how civilizations discover what they are capable of. She gestured to the window where human ships could be seen patrolling alongside vessels from species that had once been Council members. The galaxy is bigger than the Council ever imagined, and there are threats out there that you have been hiding from for millennia. But you do not have to hide anymore, because you will protect us. Because we will teach you to protect yourselves, Okonkwo corrected. And in return, you will teach us what you know, your technology and your history and your understanding of the universe. Admiral Tanaka stepped forward. We are not conquerors, she said. We have no interest in ruling the galaxy or building an empire. But we will not allow anyone to threaten Earth again, and we will not stand by while other species are exterminated the way you tried to exterminate us. You would go to war for species you have never met. We would go to war for anyone who needs our help, Tanaka confirmed. That is also who we are. Volthrax was quiet for a long moment as she processed what she was hearing. The Council believed you were too dangerous to exist. She finally said, We thought your violence made you a threat to the galaxy. And now I think your violence is not the most important thing about you, Volthrax replied. Your compassion is, your ability to choose mercy when revenge would be easier. Your refusal to become the monsters you could so easily be. She looked around the assembly hall at the humans who had defeated an empire and chosen to rebuild instead of destroy. Perhaps the Council was right to fear you, she said, but we feared the wrong thing. We feared your capacity for destruction when we should have feared your capacity for change. Okonkwo smiled, and it was a warm expression that reached her eyes. Welcome to the New Order, Ambassador. It will not be peaceful, and it will not be easy, but it will be better than what came before. The First Galactic Alliance was signed that day in the same hall where humanity had been sentenced to death. It was an alliance built not on fear, but on hope. Not on threats, but on the belief that different species could choose to be better together than they had been. Apart, the Council had given humanity 1 year to die. Instead, humanity had used that year to unite their world, master alien technology, defeat an empire, and emerge not as conquerors, but as the protectors the galaxy never knew it needed. Volthrax had been right about one thing in her original transmission. Humanity was dangerous, but danger, it turned out, was exactly what the universe required, and humanity was just getting started.